So that would be the game that you would say kick-started your love for the RPG series. That'd be
Yeah.
the maybe not the game that you now favourite the most, but it's definitely the one that had the longest impact due to the...
Dude, Sora. He was just on an adventure to get his friends back and helping people along the way. How could you not love it? It had Final Fantasy characters. It had amazing music. The score was beautiful. And it had Disney characters, right? Like, come on.
So how would you say you viewed that? Because obviously most people who've played Kingdom Hearts played Final Fantasy first. How did it feel going from Kingdom Hearts to Final Fantasy and seeing the characters the opposite way round?
Interesting point there. I did play Final Fantasy I when I was very, very, very little, but I did not know what I was doing.
Welcome to Side Quests and Save Points, the RPG podcast where we deep dive into MMOs, RPGs, and everything in between. I'm your host, Chef Monkey, and today's episode is going to be a special one. Joining me is Rin. He is a Twitch partner, a Capcom creator, and not to mention a high-end raider in Final Fantasy XIV. If you're into Monster Hunter, Final Fantasy XIV, or RPGs in general, you've likely seen his incredible content. We're going to be talking about his history with RPGs and MMOs, his love for the Monster Hunter series, and even take a step back to discuss the genre as a whole. Of course, we'll also be touching on his content creation journey, what it's like to be a Twitch partner, and work with various companies like Capcom. So let's grab your potions, sharpen your weapons, and let's get started. Welcome, Rin. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thanks. We actually just wrapped up a little bit of a stream earlier today where we were playing Monster Hunter, as you would have noted.
So if you would like just to take a quick moment, introduce yourself as a person, we'll touch on everything that you do shortly. But if you'd just like to let people know who you are and just give them like your earliest gaming memory.
Sure. So, hi, I'm Rin. I am a husband, I am a father, and I have 3 puppies, all that are very wonderful, and I love them very much. I've been gaming since I was a baby. Like, one of my earliest memories is doing the Little Big World in Mario, like Super Mario Brothers 3 on the NES. And I remember my older brother was playing the game, and my mom wanted him to give me a turn, but I was a kid. I was like 3 or 4, but this memory will stick with me, which is crazy because you usually don't remember memories from that young. And I was able to get through the level, and it was so cool. And just after that, it was game after game after game, all the generations. Like, I had a Super Nintendo, a Nintendo 64, all the way through all the Nintendos, all the PlayStations. My brother got the PlayStations until eventually I got a PS2 for my birthday with Kingdom Hearts, and that was it. I was done. I wasn't too big into being an RPG-focused player then, but Kingdom Hearts just affected my life so much that after that, I'm like, I'm playing every Final Fantasy. I'm playing everything. I got my hands on Chrono Trigger. I got my hands on Final Fantasy IV. Like, it was done.
So that would be the game that you would say kick-started your love for the RPG series. That'd be the maybe not the game that you now favourite the most, but it's definitely the one that had the longest impact due to the
Sora.
butterfly effect.
Sora. He was just on an adventure to get his friends back and helping people along the way. How could you not love it? It had Final Fantasy characters. It had amazing music. The score was beautiful. And it had Disney characters, right? Like, come on.
So how would you say you viewed that? Because obviously most people who've played Kingdom Hearts played Final Fantasy first. How did it feel going from Kingdom Hearts to Final Fantasy and seeing the characters the opposite way round?
Interesting point there. I did play Final Fantasy I when I was very, very, very little, but I did not know what I was doing, right? So I did play Final Fantasy first. And then when Kingdom Hearts had come out, I had already played Final Fantasy VIII because I was really into wrestling games. And the local pawn shop had a wrestling game, and I picked up, it was like SmackDown Know Your Role or something. And it was broken. It didn't work. So we took it back, and my mom gave them hell. And they were like, well, the only other game we have for the PlayStation right now is this game. It's Final Fantasy VIII. And I was like, all right, I'll try that. And I remember I went home, I booted it up. I was listening to System of a Down had just released Toxicity, and that was it. I loved that game so much. I poured so much time into that game, but I wasn't quite like I want to play a bunch of RPGs yet. Kingdom Hearts was what did it for me. But I had familiarity when we saw, I was like, that's not Leon, that's Squall. Like, what are you doing?
I'm sure I looked it up, but I don't remember if there was or why they changed his name and didn't change anyone else's.
The less you know, the better.
Yes, I know there is opening up that fandom is just a whole worm of content that is just mind-boggling.
I think Kingdom Hearts makes sense if you don't want to dive into it too deeply. And the more you dive into it, then the more lost you get. And then you come around the other side and you're like, okay, it all makes sense again.
Yep. Very similar to one of my first memories gaming. Must have been 2000-ish because Linkin Park's Hybrid Theory album had just come out.
Ooh, very good album.
And all I remember is that Christmas is I got the Hybrid Theory music CD for Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
I had rented Digimon World from Blockbuster, and I literally played that game the whole of Christmas Day on mute, listening to Hybrid Theory on repeat for about 5 hours.
See, you didn't mention that you were going to bring up Digimon World, or I would have grabbed my place. Yeah, I still have my copy of Digimon World 1 in my living room. It is there in a box, so I'm not going to go get it now. But I love Digimon. The Pokemon Digimon War. I like them both, but I'm Team Digimon. Who's your favorite?
I don't think it's ever should have been a war. Like it's the orange one with the wings. It's Patamon, isn't it?
Yeah,
Patamon.
Boom Bubble Pop. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. He's just awesome. I remember
it's like a little like pig guy that becomes an angel.
So I didn't touch it for the longest time again, and then I picked up Digimon World First Order, which is apparently the first game after Digimon World where it sort of went back to that same...
Yeah, Digimon World 2 was a dungeon crawler with a set number of spaces you were allotted, and then Digimon World 3 was more like a Final Fantasy kind of.
Yeah. But I got World Order, and I've still got that save file on my PlayStation 4, and it's still in process.
Yay.
Yeah, so that's sort of your first introduction to gaming. So we've talked about your first RPGs that you played. What was your first MMO?
It's a game. These developers made it as a college project in 1996, either 1996 or 1995, and then they launched a server in 96 in Germany. And it only had a couple of players at first, and they started opening up more servers. And then eventually, fast forward to when I started, some of my friends at school, we all had bad computers. It was like Walmart, integrated graphics card, it's terrible stuff. What can we play, right? Not a lot. There were like a lot of like Asian MMOs coming out that were gorgeous and beautiful at the time, but like no computer that you got from Walmart was going to play that. So I played this game called Tibia, which is like an isometric top-down, very horrible game. I loved it, played it for like 15 years. You had no level cap. You had no skill level cap. Think of it like RuneScape, but forever.
Yep.
And
I have just brought it up on Google, and they've done a massive summer update for 2024. It's still going strong.
And they're introducing a new job this year, which is the first time they've ever done that ever. Like there was only 4, so they're vocations, but they were basically jobs. You had the paladin, which is your archer. You had the sorcerer, which is what you think. You had the knight, which is what you think. And you had the druid, which is like sort of your healer, but also like earth magic. And as you leveled up, your character got physically faster. So like higher level characters were able to get places more easily. And it was all open world combat. And there were like safe zones you can go in, but not if you had attacked people. And if you attacked them, you got skulls, and then you couldn't log out of the game for a certain amount of time. Like you would be punished for PvPing if you were the one who initiated, then not punished if you didn't. And when you died, you lost your backpack with all of your inventory. Each equipment slot had a 10% chance to drop too, and you were logged out of the game. And you had to log back in. You also lost 10% of the experience, not of your level, but that you had gained since level 1. So you could just lose 3 months of work. And like you could go pick your stuff back up, right? If you managed to log back in and there was not a queue, and there wasn't a queue either. If the server was full, it just said, server's full, please try again. And you just had to spam it until you got back in. And then if you got back in and you got to your body in time and nobody else had found it, you can get your stuff back. But your body became a lootable corpse that anybody could open and take. It was so bad. Very bad for your mental.
Guessing this is probably going to be one of the first full loot RPG MMOs then.
Yeah, it was something. It was very I have friends today, and we are like thicker than thieves because of the times we went through there, right? Because the stakes were so high, the moments that you overcame were even better. So like, even though it sounds terrible, like imagine the memories you're making, as opposed to playing an MMO today where maybe you're playing through and the enemies you're fighting literally don't matter because you're just going to blow through them. Like it wouldn't matter, right? But like now it's like, okay,
Yep.
if I lag, I'm going to die. And that
Um,
was my introduction. And eventually I made my way over to Final Fantasy XIV, but it took a long time. I had watched one of my friends who actually got me into Monster Hunter was playing Final Fantasy XI, and he would let me use his keyboard sometimes while he was playing. And as he was running away from monsters, I was a jerk. I would type /sit, and your character would just stop. You'd be like, and then the whole sit animation while being hit, the stand animation, and then you could leave again. So I'd get him killed.
Yep, and obviously it's bad in 11 because there's also XP loss.
Yeah, although that I think is a percentage of your level, right? I don't think it's total.
Yeah, so
you could level down though.
It was 10% of your level, and it could result in you leveling down.
I did level him down once below his threshold for the level of equipment he was wearing, and that was not cool. Suddenly he's like, well, I can't wear anything. It's like, what do you mean you can't wear anything? Put on your low level stuff. I just upgraded it. I sold it all. It's like,
yes, you had to take the gamble. You had to sell your stuff, and yeah, man, it was brutal.
Yeah, it was. It was. Wait, what was your first MMO?
So my first MMO was Final Fantasy XI. Okay, my first MMO RPG was Final Fantasy XI.
That's fair.
Technically, my first MMO, if you don't count websites like Habbo Hotel and Neopets.
Dude, you totally count was Phantasy Star Online.
No, so I watched my friend who had a Dreamcast play Phantasy Star Online, but my first standalone installed, not browser-based MMO was Second Life.
Okay. Cool.
And I had a buddy on Second Life that said, we'll share the same real-life name, we shared a lot of the same interests, he's also from the UK, and he's like, dude, you like Final Fantasy? Come check this out. Yeah. And it was right around release because it was the first two expansions that got bundled with the base game for this release over Western, not Japan. Yeah. So it was around 2004, 2005. And then that was it. I was done. Like, nice. Between me and my brother, when I got him playing as well, like, we sank years, I mean, literally years into that game.
Good.
I liked, and we'll touch on this later, the difference between different MMOs and how they work and stuff, but especially how the interaction between players differs in MMOs is really different compared to I know it varies game to game.
Well, but it varies based on age group, demographics, like where you are in the world and your culture on your server.
But that's what I found really different about, I found really different about 11. I found it different about everything else, technically, because 11 was my first.
Sure. So you only had, that was your first impression.
There was servers. They weren't region separated. It was just, these are your servers. Pick one. Good luck with the lag.
Yeah.
And I'll be completely honest, I don't know what went wrong with all other MMOs. Why Final Fantasy XI could manage multi-region servers on multiple platforms going to PlayStation 2, Xbox 360, and PC simultaneously to the point where PvP was balanced.
Was it balanced, or did people have lower expectations at the time?
Probably a mix of both.
The game was a very slow-paced system, right? I did end up I got it very briefly on the Xbox 360, but by that point, everybody was max leveled. And like, yeah, if you level up, we'll play with you. And I was like, okay, cool. You want to help me? They're like, no. I was like, well, it's hard solo. Like, yeah, you can't level solo. I was like, okay. It was hard. I got to like level 20.
That became a lot easier when they introduced level sync.
They also introduced like bounties, right? Like you could kill a couple of these creatures and they'll give you a big experience chunk.
But yeah, so you've briefly mentioned Monster Hunter. You are a known Monster Hunter content creator. I feel that there is a very fine line between what is classified as an action adventure game and what is classified as an RPG.
Monster Hunter is technically all three, an action, an RPG, and an MMO. Monster Hunter 1 for the PlayStation 2, that bad boy right here, by the way, online.
Nice.
Online from the get-go. Free to play online. You didn't need, there was no PSN network at the time. You had to get a broadband connector, this big chunky thing that you put in the back of your PlayStation 2. And I remember, like, my brother had one for his for, like, SOCOM or something, and I'm just playing Monster Hunter. And I went and I got, like, a USB keyboard, because remember, back then, keyboards were, like, I don't know what the connector was called, but it was, like, that round thing with the little prongs in it. Yeah. It was, like, a very strange connector, and I had to go get a USB keyboard so I could plug it into the PlayStation and actually play and talk to people. And I put, like 5,000 or 6,000 hours into Monster Hunter 1.
Yep.
It's a long time.
What would you say is the defining trait for a game to be classed as an RPG? So in my opinion, it comes down to, like, are there levels and are there stats?
Sure. But the story narrative?
See, yes and no, because obviously RPG, role-playing game, you are playing the role of someone.
Sure.
That could classify as quite a lot of games. Mario, you are playing the role of Mario.
Yeah, that's true.
So I've always had it in my head, whether it's been put in there through media or what the history of RPGs has always been, are there levels, are there stats? But there are games, and we spoke briefly before the episode about, for example, Outward. Outward, there are no levels. There are no stats. You just get better armor and you get better at the game. Your health doesn't go up. Your stamina doesn't go up. You are stuck with whatever stats you have, and yet it is still classed as an RPG game.
Well, those both have elements that are pretty similar, right? In that there is a lateral curve to achieve, right? As you go through Outward, you're a commoner, you're trying to make it in the world, and as you learn how to function, you're going to be able to execute that game a little bit better, right? So you are actually progressing in your character. I assume if you start out as a commoner, do you eventually get, like, does the game become easier? Do you get recognition? Do any of the mechanics or is it just you know how to play?
It's just a case of genuine skill increase in the game and learning the mechanics, kind of very similar to a Dark Souls-esque kind of game.
Okay. I mean, I think Dark Souls is also an RPG, right? It's like an action. Like, if you were to think about Monster Hunter, what are you doing? At your very core, you are slaying monsters, or you're capturing monsters. The guild actually recommends you don't slay them if possible. You don't want to disrupt the ecosystem, and studying something that's alive is a little bit better than studying something that's dead. Although there are some pretty gruesome cutscenes in some of the earlier Monster Hunters where they show them, like, carving the scales off of monsters to craft the weapons and stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, maybe it's a mercy to just kill them and have it be done. It's kind of crazy. But as far as an RPG goes for Monster Hunter, as the games have progressed, there has been sort of an underlying story, but you could say that there have been RPGs out there that people really like the story from and some think it's bland, right? Or that it doesn't have a lot of depth. Monster Hunter now, with Wilds coming out, is supposed to have an incredibly in-depth story. It's got full cutscenes, voiced, like they were not voiced a long time ago. And there were some cutscenes, but it was just like the monster arriving and now you're fighting it.
Yeah.
It wasn't like some big story. Or it was like, in Monster Hunter 1, you show up in the village and this guy's like, I fought this dude and he broke me. I can't hunt anymore. Now you got to do it. And you're like, okay, cool. That's the story. That's the plot. And then at the end, the final offline boss is a Monobolos, which is not a creature that's come back for a long time. Please bring him back. They have Diablos, which is a two-horned. Monobolos is the one-horned version. And you fight this guy, the one-horned devil, and you beat him. And the guy's like, you've done me proud. You did it. Now you are a master hunter. You are the hero. And then there's a little bit of an Easter egg. When you go behind your house in the first village, there is a sword in a stone. And the entire game, you do not have the power to pull the sword from the stone. And then finally you do, and you're rewarded with the hero's sword, which looks exactly like the Master Sword. Fast forward to the 3DS, they have a collab where you get to actually become Link.
Very nice. So they've taken elements of, I guess, English folk tales with the sword and the stone, and as well as other companies' games as inspiration.
And many collabs over the years, too.
Yes, there have been. I only recently got the Rathalos mount in Final Fantasy, technically last year, but it feels like this year, because
The
I'm still
Rathalos
writing.
fight was really good.
I'm still writing 2024 on my paperwork and then crossing it out.
Then a +1,
Yeah.
right?
Before we carry on into Monster Hunter.
Yeah.
So Monster Hunter is known as an RPG for the most part. So
I agree.
why, with story-driven games, that there's a very, like, the narrative is the defining feature. Why do you feel maybe games like Assassin's Creed and God of War are not classified as RPGs and are classified as action-adventure?
Oh, dude, I have always referred to those as action-adventure RPGs. Right? You are... Well, so it's difficult because there's also the nature of, like, in Monster Hunter, you are you, right? You're your hunter. If you play Final Fantasy VII, you are Cloud. You are Tifa. You are not a character that you're making. You're a predetermined character, right? And in God of War, it's the same thing. You are Kratos. I would say that maybe older God of Wars seem less like RPGs than, like, maybe the newer, right? The God of War and Ragnarok, where the artistic design, it's very much driven for the story, right? But the first one was kind of like a hack and slash. It had the story and you cared about it. And a lot of people deep dive into it. It's great, right? Assassin's Creed as well. Very beautiful story. I definitely think those are RPGs, but I mean, I don't know. Do you get to be wrong but also be right?
Do you think it's just a natural development and progression of the gaming industry and the gaming genres that the two categories are just starting to merge?
Maybe it's better to have a certain separation, because RPG encompasses, like you said, you could be Mario and now you're just Mario. You could be Mega Man and now you're Mega Man. But those games are platformers and side scrollers, right?
Yes.
But I think RPG is such a broad term that maybe it gets applied to a specific niche, so that when you say the word RPG or like the acronym, that you know more generally what you're getting into. Maybe. When I was younger and I thought RPG, I thought this is a turn-based game.
Yes.
Right? And that is not the case anymore.
No.
But maybe because when Assassin's Creed and when God of War first came out, you still thought like Final Fantasy IX and X, like these were still turn-based, right? Maybe that's the difference.
Maybe. So let's jump back into Monster Hunter. You said you played Monster Hunter 1 on PlayStation. It isn't till, I would say, World that Monster Hunter became massive in the Western side of gaming.
I'm in the West. It became massive with me. Yeah, you're right. It wasn't until World.
What was it that drew you to the series initially? Because there wasn't all the big marketing, that they didn't have access to everything, and it's very rare for, counterintuitive saying this because of Final Fantasy, but for Eastern releases to become as big in Europe.
That's fair.
And
I mean, when
America.
Chrono Trigger first came out, were you able to find a copy, or did you even know what it was?
I only knew what it was because of Final Fantasy. It wasn't like Chrono Trigger.
I didn't know
Chrono
it existed
Cross.
until they had the. It was like that anthology with Final Fantasy IV and Chrono Trigger in the same PlayStation 1 case, but I didn't know it existed on the Super Nintendo. I had no idea. Right? Like, and I remember I definitely don't use emulators, but if I did in my youth, I would have played like Dragon Ball Z Hyperdimension and stuff on like the ZSNES. But like those games didn't exist over here, right? We had to like import them, which how did you import back then? We didn't even have eBay. Like you just it was like impossible, right? So you had to jump through some hoops if you wanted to experience these games.
Yeah, especially due to imports, and I know people still get confused to this day with the Western and Japanese numbering of Final Fantasy.
Is it 2 or is it 4? What are we doing here?
So what drew you to the Monster Hunter series and the Monster Hunter games? What sold it to you?
That same friend that I got killed in Final Fantasy XI. I went over his house after school one day and he was not playing Final Fantasy XI. I was like, what are you doing? What are you playing? He's like, oh, this is Monster Hunter. And I was like, what's that? And he goes, here, I'll let you try. Here you go. And he hands me the controller and I've got no gear on at all. And he's like, all you got to do is like, just go get this egg. And you just got to bring this egg back. And there are delivery missions in that game. There's some like, go collect stuff, go gather stuff. It's not all just hunting.
Yeah.
I'm carrying the egg back. I'm walking. And then down swoops this guy out of the sky. And he just has my number. He knocks my butt on the ground and I drop the egg. and then I immediately want to fight him because I'm like, I have a giant sword on my back. This is a monster. I'm going to fight this boss. And he kills me. And I run back and he kills me again. And I run back and then the missions, I didn't win. I went home and I begged my mom to please take me to GameStop. There were exactly 3 copies of Monster Hunter 1 in our entire state. And I made it to a GameStop that had one before it closed that night. And I got it. And it is this copy right here. And I can actually show you the disc too. So you can see I have taken care of it as much as I could over the years. It's got some scratches, but it came used. And,
Fair enough.
That was it. It was over for me. I was met with the challenge, and I'm the type of guy that when I play games, I want the challenge. I want to overcome something. I will play on the hardest difficulty, which can sometimes be arduous if I don't have a lot of time. But I feel, and now if play on whatever difficulty you want. If you want to play on easy mode, that's fine. I mean, people fail trials and stuff in like the solo instance in Final Fantasy XIV that gives you the option for easy mode, right? Whatever. That's fine. Who cares? It doesn't matter. If you want to do story mode or savage or whatever, it doesn't matter. But I personally, I feel like, and God of War is a really good example with this, when the new ones came out in the reboot, when you don't play on the hardest difficulty, sometimes there are parts of the game the developers worked on that you do not engage with. Like with God of War, you could just smash the square button, right? You could just light attack your way through the whole game, never block if you're on the easy difficulty, and you'll be fine, right? And then you play on Give Me God of War, and now if you do not parry, you are dead. I like the challenge. So I got the challenge in Monster Hunter. That was the bug. It bit me, and that was it. I had it forever.
So I'm going to ask you what your favorite Monster Hunter game is, but caveat with it based on the time you played it.
Okay, so
which
not
one
if I were
did
to
you
go back and play it right now? But
no. So which one did you? Yeah, in its heyday, which one would you classify as your favorite, and why?
Damn. Also, for those of you who don't know, this is a monster for Monster Hunter. Voted the #1 most popular monster in all of Monster Hunter. Big Daddy is an ogre who is actually on the PS3. So you ask these questions as if I don't just have all the games ready. Don't ask me why I have 2 copies of this one. This game. So Monster Hunter Tri came out on the Wii, if you remember. That was when it first kind of got a commercial here in the West. We actually got to see like promotion over here in the West, but it didn't really pick up. But I think the Wii just tried to push for everything. They were doing so much ambitious stuff. And there was underwater combat. People hated that. People hated underwater combat. And because the devs made the weapons work like they might underwater. So you're swinging a giant greatsword and you started doing some twirls that you didn't control your character until you were done. So underwater, I used a lance because the lance acted like a torpedo and it was really
Makes
strong.
sense.
Every other weapon was horrible underwater, but there was underwater combat. And then the PSP got Monster Hunter Portable 3rd, which then also got HD remixed for the PlayStation 3. I had both. That game was so gorgeous and beautiful. I must have sunk 6,000 or 7,000 hours into that game. Now, unlike Monster Hunter 1, where I had 6 different characters that are all like 999, that's how I was able to know how many hours I had on that game. This one was just the one character, so you had to keep track, because after 999, it stops. But I think, sorry, it's a big tangent here. It's a very difficult question you're asking me.
Yep.
Because Monster Hunter Freedom for the PSP was so good. Freedom 2 was also really good. They introduced new weapons and started having cutscenes that were cool. And then Freedom Unite came out on the PSP, and that game was gorgeous because I would get to play it on my breaks. I remember I was working at like Dunkin' Donuts, and like during breaks, I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going Monster Hunter. That is cool. And that game was like a culmination of the first generation and the second generation. Like Unite was like, this is everything put into one. And then the 3rd gen had the culmination in Portable 3rd. And then the 4th gen had Generations Ultimate, which I actually didn't get to play until I came back to it after Rise and World. But I think Rise, World, and Generations Ultimate suffered. They got a bad rep from me. I cannot judge them fairly because I played each of them while I was actively raiding in Final Fantasy XIV, and I was so enamored and engrossed in 14. Like when you're first, like nowadays there's a lot of hostility and people are disliking the game, but I feel like they're disliking it because it's repetitive, but that's what they loved in the first place. So all the new players are loving that, and that was me back then. So I was all 14, and I still played Monster Hunter because I love Monster Hunter, but like, you're like a new raid. Yeah, you're like, there's a patch next week. I'm like, all right, Monster Hunter, like there's a patch next week. You gotta wait 7 or 8 weeks because you don't finish it all at once, right? I think it's Monster Hunter 1.
Yep.
It was first time that so while Tibia was my first MMO. Monster Hunter was my first community of online friends. And like those lobbies, you still played with 4 people, but you were joining 100-player lobbies and then players of like 20-player rooms and stuff. And I had people, we met up every night. We hung out all night. Some of us would be like, oh, we're going to like, my parents yelling at me, I'm going to be late for school. It was just so cool, you know? It was just so cool. And it was rare because back then, this is like early 2000s. Not every household had a computer. And then if you had one, what were you going to do? I remember there was like this forum. It was like Gaia Online, which is kind of like Neopets and stuff. And there was like little mini games and forums, but like there wasn't a whole lot going for it. And it was like, okay, well, I'm going to play Monster Hunter. And I met a lot of people on Monster Hunter. And we just had a great time. And I really do think Monster Hunter 1, I would never play it today. But it was just, it's gotta be my second favorite, because I think my first favorite is actually the Wilds beta.
Fair enough.
I put 200 hours into that, by the way.
That's a lot.
That is a lot of cool people.
Yeah.
So being a content creator, I get to hang out with so many people now, right?
Yep.
And play with friends. And now that it's like the first simultaneous release across multiple platforms, I was able to play with so many people and have so many cool memories.
Yeah.
It's really, really cool. So I think it's the Wilds beta.
Do you think the evolution of the series going from like Monster Hunter 1 all the way to Wilds, not every game series that wants to produce sequels and keep producing ends up as successful as Final Fantasy, Monster Hunter, Assassin's Creed?
Or they do and they stop anyways.
Yeah, or they do and they stop anyways. What are your thoughts on the evolution of the series, not just graphically, but from, like you said, going from I'm hurt, please kill this monster for me, to full-on story, and it gets you invested in not only in the game, but in the character.
So it's hard.
Do you feel that it's evolved and progressed and developed? Is there anything that you think that maybe they should have or could have done better, or anything they've not developed so much that you think that they've either left and it's a good thing that they've left it, or that you think they should have touched on it and improved it more?
So in Monster Hunter 1, this is from the Arcadian, this controller, it's very cool. In Monster Hunter 1, you moved with your left stick and you attacked with your right stick, and it was slow and methodical. And if you did not, like, you drew your weapon with like triangle, but you didn't attack with it. If you swung your sword, you waited until you lifted it back out of the ground, then maybe you could roll a couple seconds later. Creatures were slow. You were slow. Combat was horrible. The hitboxes were horrible. You'd have an enemy do a hip check like this, and you're over here, and you got hit anyway. It was really bad. But I think as the generations progressed, they introduced more weapons and technology advanced. Do you need a moment?
Nope, we're all good.
Okay. As technology advanced, they were able to make the monsters do more and make us do more. So we got more agency over what we were able to do. And I think that the combat got faster, which made us enjoy the game more. Right? Nowadays, if you were handed a game and you were very slow, I don't think you would enjoy it. Like The Witcher. I think The Witcher 1 was a terrible game, but The Witcher 3 was a very good game. And people who liked The Witcher played them all, and I think the natural progression was great. Same thing with Monster Hunter. The combat has just developed to a point, like if you play Wilds now, or you see gameplay of Wilds, it looks very fast. It looks very fluid. And I think every generation they try something new. And in World, there was a clutch claw system where you had to tenderize weak spots, and basically you drove your weapon to the side of the monster, and for a few minutes, it would be a weak spot to deal extra damage. And people were not very happy with that because you did it not necessarily using your weapon. Like, you drove this claw attachment from your arm into the monster, and then you could jump on it. And as long as it wasn't doing an attack, you could weaken the spot. But if it was flailing its head and you jumped onto the head, you'd be knocked off and you'd take damage, and now you're CC'd. Not a very nice system because you're breaking your... Like, imagine you're playing Final Fantasy XIV, and then every minute in combat, you have a QTE. Would you feel like that was disruptive? Or like if you're in Mario and you're in the middle of a platform, and as you're wall jumping halfway up, it stops you and it has you type in like Luigi's Great or something. It's kind of like that. And it's annoying. And then in Monster Hunter Rise, they added wire bugs, which allowed you to whip around, and it became very, very fast. And some people were fans of it. I was. Some people were not fans of it. You also had a mount system with your Palamute, which is a dog that you get to mount now and get around the combat pass, like around the map. And that was released for the Switch. So the graphics took a step down from World, but I liked that because it had a little bit of a more anime approach, and it is on a handheld. The Nintendo systems tend to be a little bit more cartoony, I think. And Wilds is now they've listened to the feedback, and they've taken the good elements that people liked, and they've taken out the bad elements. So like we had a mount in World kind of, but it would automatically route that you couldn't control or ride. And then in Rise, they had one that you could completely control. And now in Wilds, the Sacred that we're getting, which is basically a chocobo, you can manually ride it, and it can also auto-route to items that are on your map. That's really cool. We've come from having consumables, so as you're attacking, your weapon become more blunt and dull, and you would have to sharpen it with whetstones. And that's where I learned about the word whetstone. It's actually from Monster Hunter. And you would only have 20 of them in a hunt if you brought 20, and maybe you could gather more. And maybe you would find a mining point because maybe there was a crack in a wall that looked weird, and if you went up to it, you'd have a consumable pickaxe. You do not have a consumable pickaxe. It's a very distinct thing that's not only on your mini-map, but it's also very visible. Like it's this different color than the wall. You're like, this is what I can gather. And whetstones are infinite. So they've come a really, really, really long way. You also used to go into combat. You'd have like one inventory block of space, and then that was all you could carry in the hunt. And then in World, they made it a little bit better. You could carry more items, but you might have to go back to your tent. But like before that, you didn't resupply. You had what you had. And now in Wilds, you can bring a second weapon with you. You can open up a pouch on your Sacred. Your handler NPC will just drop extra stuff off with you. Your friends can hand you stuff. It's really, really cool. It's convenient. So I think to answer your question about what makes it so successful and like what has made it last over the years is they actually had an interview recently, and they said themselves, we stay in our lane and we actually don't look at the competition in our genre. We just keep doing our thing.
Fair enough.
And it works, right? Like, sure, they have negative feedback, but they listen to that feedback and they want that feedback so they can make changes. I mean, even so from the Wilds beta, now keep in mind, they've been working on this game for a couple of years, right? It was like announced at the Game Awards in 2023, and then we've come a long way. And then they had the open beta test, and they changed like half the weapons after the feedback from that. They heard what people said. There was like no hit stop, which for people who don't know, hit stop is like when you go to attack and it's like, you like feel it go through, versus something very floaty like Kingdom Hearts combat where Sora's just going through the air and it does these like slashing his sword, well, his keyblade, but it doesn't really look like it's making an effect. They made the weapons look like that in Wilds because people complained that World felt too slow. And what new hunters didn't realize is that your combat wasn't slow, it was just impactful, right? And so they had the first beta test, people like, this sucks. What happened? My attacks feel weak. And now they added it all back in. They're like, all right, good, because we wanted it in the first place, was what they were said. They were like, we changed it because you didn't like it. We're happy to put it back. And then they did. And then some of the weapons, like some of these mains were like, look, we love this weapon. It doesn't do this. It's like if you were playing Astrologian in 14 and you were like, I want my card system back. And I'm like, okay, we'll give you the card system back. That's what happened with Insect Glaive. People are like, I liked jumping through the air. They're like, okay, we'll give you more air combat. And like Lance received so many changes to be able to reposition and move around. And then people were like, we thought we wanted this, but we don't. We actually just like the methodical pace of Lance. So like, okay, we'll change it back again, but we need time. So like even in the most recent review builds, it's not completely changed again until full release. So like they really do care, right? Like, I doubt they had that planned.
And they've, had to go back. I mean, if they're listening to the feedback that late on, the release is what, 8 days away at this point?
Yeah, 8 days away. And this feedback is in like the last, like, I don't know, 3 months, which in the development world is not a lot of time.
Yeah. So with Wilds coming out, just for anyone that is listening, and it's their first Monster Hunter game or their first Monster Hunter game since World, any tips or starting advice for people that want to just really get to grips and get into this game?
Yeah.
Combat tips or just anything in general
so when
before
you start
we move
the game,
on.
There's like a mini quiz where like they're like, do you know what weapon you want? And you either you know what you want or you don't. And they'll ask a few questions about what you like, and they're like, maybe try this weapon. Try them all. Like, take that quiz, pick the first weapon. If you feel overwhelmed, just whatever. Every single weapon is very viable this time around. If you find yourself getting hit a lot, maybe you want a weapon that can guard, right? If you find yourself trying to get out of the way a lot, maybe not use a slow weapon so you can dodge, because something like the dual blades is very fast. Sword and shield is very fast, and it can guard, and it can do a lot of damage, so maybe that's perfect for you. Pick up everything you see. So like, first, just try a weapon. Doesn't matter. Try it. pick up everything you see. You never know what's going to be useful. And your inventory at the camp is infinite. So if you store everything, it's fine. Whatever. You might need it later. And it's okay to fail. That's like the biggest point. Sometimes people think they're going to run into like elitists and toxic people. But Monster Hunter Wilds is doing something that's so exceptional where you are going to be able to bring NPCs with you. So like you'll start a mission and then you shoot an SOS player and you could change your settings so that only NPCs join you. So now you're not going to be judged, right? Who cares? And if the NPCs die, it doesn't cost you anything. You could fail 3 times in a hunt and you're fine. The monster's still healthy. So I think my biggest piece of advice is like, it's all right. It's all right to fail. You're going to. I can tell you right now, you're going to. Something like Monster Hunter did not become successful because the monsters were easy, right? It became successful because they were difficult. Like every encounter is a boss fight. Like if you've ever watched Monster Hunter footage, they kind of look like it's like a mini boss from Elden Ring or Dark Souls or something, right? Like there is combat, there is telegraphs. Even the Rathalos fight in 14, I think, gave people trouble, right? Where there was no cast bars now because they tried to make it authentic. It's a really good game. I'm very passionate about it. Just give it a try and don't have any expectations of trying to be as good as the speedrunners or like the people who have been playing it for 20 years. Like you're not going to be right off the bat, and that's okay.
Yep. I'm going to give it a try, and I guarantee I'm going to fail multiple times. Although I'm glad you've said they've introduced more aerial combat into the insect glaive, because that was my weapon of choice.
Really?
I really liked it in World. I didn't complete the game. I didn't get very far, but it's the weapon that I enjoyed the most.
There was a piece of feedback for the insect glaive that they explicitly said, we're not going to do what you guys want. And that is why this controller is the best. You see the 2 buttons on the back?
Yep.
Custom controllers can have bumpers. When you're playing Insect Glaive now, you have a charged attack, but you have to be charging it while you're doing your other attacks, and then release after you do a certain attack. This, while moving around, can be very difficult. This is very easy. So I have mapped this button to be my hold circle, and that is the biggest complaint. And the solution that everybody I've talked to has said is they have a controller that has a customizable button, that they make that button. But the devs are like, we know that it's wonky, we know that it's difficult to execute, but we want you to have something difficult to execute.
Fair enough.
I'm paraphrasing there, but basically they were like, look, there's this added layer of difficulty and you're rewarded because Insect Glaive has potentially like the highest damage cap right now if you could play it properly. So of course they're going to want you to feel the reward. Like if it just was easy and it did the most damage, everybody would play it, right?
Yeah. There needs to be some sort of skill-based element to it rather than just button mash. Well, you said that you not struggled, but a lot of your time that you probably would have spent playing World was spent raiding in 14.
That's true.
When did you start 14? Did you start from A Realm Reborn, or did you join?
I started when A Realm Reborn came out because my computer was not good enough for the first version.
Yep.
And I was working a lot at the time anyways.
And would you say, I know you said that you played Tibia and there's some other MMOs that you played. Would you say
played something like 200 or something MMOs.
Yep. There's a long list. Would you say that Final Fantasy XIV is probably the one that you've now spent the most time in, or at least appreciate the most?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I played Tibia for like 15 years, but it wasn't like I was playing 24 hours a day, right?
Yeah.
But I think my main character on 14, now keep in mind, you could have more than I have all kinds of alts, like we have a Kronk character and stuff, we have all sorts of stuff, right? But like, I think my character on Final Fantasy for just Rin has like 1,900 days of playtime. And that is including 24-hour days when you do your playtime there. So 14 is probably the one that I've played absolutely the most. It's been, 12 years now almost?
Yep. Yeah, it's going, and it's going to be going for some time.
I believe it. Like if 11 is still live service today, think of what 14 is going to do.
That is my only complaint. I wish they would bundle the subscriptions.
Yeah. Especially since they're doing like the Vanadil raid series this expansion, right?
I would play Retail 11. I might not enjoy it as much as I did in my, like, when it was fresh and new, but it would give me something to do between patches.
You would appreciate it because you know there's something that you're going to get to, right? Like now that they've started giving 14 players lore. I mean, it's not the first collab we've had. We had an 11 collab before. We've had like Shantoto and stuff show up, but then you get to see that character and you're like, it's the character. Yeah, like, I recognize this one.
So I did do a boss prediction
Yeah,
for the
raid we just got.
the raid. Well, I've done it for all three.
Okay. Did you predict the Archangels in the first raid series? Like in the first set? I thought they were going to be at the end.
So I did predict them. I don't think it was that raid because I broke it down to, well, it's going to be the first three expansions.
Yeah.
The
was
base game
Chains of Promethea
chains.
in the first?
So there's the base game, then I should
There's like
know
two
this.
Chains expansions, aren't there?
Well, there's Chains
I
of
think-
Promethea and Rise of
Yeah.
the Zealot.
Yeah.
And I knew Shadow Lord was going to be the last boss because it was in the promotional piece.
Sure. I mean, it was on the artwork, yeah. And then we got Fafnir, right?
Yep,
Was
I
that-
did not see that one coming.
I didn't think we were going to get it because technically we already got... So if people have played in the Eureka, like grand scale content, it was a big callback to 11, right? Including experience loss and level down.
Yep, because it was basically another take on Abyssia.
Yeah. I mean, I think we had Fafnir at the end of the first Eureka instance, didn't we? We had a dragon S rank that would spawn that you did have to stay on its flank, or it would tail swipe or head swipe you, and a lot of people would die. Which I think is like Fafnir's telltale thing, right? Is like stay away from the tail, stay away from the head.
Yep. Let me have a look here.
I remember
Just
when I
really
first
quick.
ran, I actually got spoiled. I queued for the 24-player alliance after, it was a couple hours after it had already been out, and I actually forgot to turn off queue in progress. So I queued in, it's like 50 minutes elapsed, and I'm like, oh man. And I queued into like the last boss.
No.
So I'm like, okay, guess I just had the whole, but it's technically not a spoiler because like you said, we already knew the Shadow Lord was there.
Yeah.
So I read it a second time and people were like, you've already cleared it. What do you mean you don't want us to tell you what? And I'm like, I don't know. I queued in progress. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I got to Fafnir and the first thing I did was pulled him and turned him sideways.
Yep.
And people are like, why did you do this? I'm like, oh.
Force of habit.
I'm
Force of habit.
stupid. Yeah, like scary stories.
Yeah, so there's a few things. I don't want to say anything. If people want to go and watch my video, I can't recall all of it, but please do because I think some of the other ones are going to appear.
Did you suspect Shantoto? Wait, is Shantoto a good guy or a bad guy in 11?
Yes.
Okay, that's fair. Are they like a Nero kind of
So-
vibe where sometimes they're in our
No,
interest
so-
and sometimes they're not?
In base lore, in the base game, in the world, she is a high prominent black mage, but she gets her own mini expansion. It's called an add-on. That's how they labeled it.
Oh, okay.
Where she basically split in two, and there was the good Shantoto and the bad Shantoto.
Yeah.
And it was a whole story arc there.
Well, technically, any good character can be a boss.
Yeah,
Because Prish was a good character, right?
Yep, she was.
I did not know Prish from 11 because I didn't get far, but I knew Prish from Final Fantasy Brave Exvius, which is a mobile game that had a bunch of characters from all sorts of Final Fantasies, and I used Prish as one of my main characters.
I wasn't expecting to fight her.
Okay. Were you expecting her to be there, though?
Yes. So I
Is she like
The
one of the iconic characters of 11?
yes, she is. She features quite a lot early on in the expansions, and then towards the end of what's considered the best iterations and eras of Final Fantasy before they increase the level cap to like stupid numbers. No, it was just after because it was in Abyssia. She is prominently featured in the end game of that content as well. She helps you fight against. I've completely lost it. I want to say Zodiac.
Oh my god. Zodiac's in 11?
No, not so. Got me looking this up now.
That's fine. I like learning.
Yeah.
A lot of people have some like really, really good memories from 11. I hear a lot of tales from players who played 11 about like their guilds fighting over control for NMs when they spawn. So you have to be like lightning fast to claim monsters in that game, right? It's all overworld. What did you play in 11? It was like a myriad of jobs, right?
Shinru. Shinryu.
Oh, Shinryu. Okay.
Yeah. She helped you in that fight.
I mean, there's a world where there's a Shinryu here in 14. They had the cool Jaja too, I think, right? Because like they recognized him.
They've come from the Treasures of Arturgan expansion, which, so in going back now, in Treasures, they introduced a mechanic called Besieged.
Sure.
Where the capital of Arturgan, that it was split into two zones, one where it was safe, and then one where there were some vendors and stuff that then led into the outer worlds of that expansion. But it would be sieged by 3 different races.
They would like come take NPCs and bring them back to their camp, right?
Yep, and you had to go and free them. I believe it was the server Siren was undefeated in Besieged for over 5 years.
Oh my god.
Yes.
And that's like, for any of you watching, that's an accomplishment. It's 24 hours a day, and like that game went into cycles. Well, that's a lot.
It still amazes me. People talk about hard games.
Absolute virtue.
Believe the hardest Absolute Virtue, Pandemonium Wardom. Absolute Virtue was first beaten by a team, doesn't really do it justice, a team of Japanese players.
They had players cycling out when it was time for bed, right?
An alliance in Final Fantasy XI works pretty much just the same in Final Fantasy
14,
where you have your 3 parties that make up an alliance, and there's mechanics in 11 where bards could only buff you with 2 songs, so bards would drop and swap parties to maintain buffs at all times, and it took them over I want to say 30 to beat Absolute Virtue with full-on sleep cycles and schedules before Square Enix went, you know what, maybe this is a bit difficult.
After that, between that and then UCOB, which also took like 11 days for the raid team to clear, they were like, we don't want people to be hospitalized for our combat. So we're just going to, like, clearly you guys are not going to not go hard at it. So we're just going to make things that don't take as long.
But so jumping back to 14, we went on a bit of a tangent
which we got Absolute Virtue in.
Yes, we did. There's a number of Final Fantasy XI characters I'd like to see in 14. And I hope some of them do appear. But your progression from A Realm Reborn to Heavensward and throughout, something I bring up every time I talk to people who play the game. What do you think of how do you think they handled the voice actor transition from A Realm Reborn to Heavensward?
Oh, it didn't matter for me because I was all about Estinian. I think the voice acting was great in all the games, and when the voice actors change, I didn't necessarily look into why or anything, but I am not always a tank. I began... Yeah, go ahead.
I am still salty that they got... he is my favourite voice actor, hands down, that they got rid of Gideon Emery for Balthier's voice actor in Final Fantasy XII for Orianja. And, I could have forgiven them, but when they had the...
I do think the voice acting now sounds better, but that might be due to direction.
I would have forgiven them if they brought him back when they did the whole return to Ivalice.
They still can. They can bring back someone else.
But they brought back Fran. They brought back other people. He should have been there.
So they have lined up a scenario where we do meet more characters there, right? Because basically the judges are high-ranking Garlean officers. So
yes.
There's no telling that we can't just show up on the shores there at some point. You know, we'll see.
Yep.
But yeah, I think that the voice acting was pretty good. But I started A Realm Reborn as a Dragoon, so in my job quests I got to meet Estinian, and then in Heavensward was all about Estinian.
Yes.
So I was completely engrossed. I was like, yes, give me more. He is so cool.
So what is your job progression per expansion?
I leveled up a tank in Heavensward because, so back in A Realm Reborn, new players aren't going to know this, but you had to have certain jobs at certain levels to even be able to unlock. You would start as your class. You're like, okay, I'm an archer. I want to become a bard. Okay, well, great. Now go level up this other job before you can do that, right?
Yep.
I want to be a paladin. Yep. Great. Is your conjurer level 15 yet? No, come back. You need to have base understandings of other jobs. So I had those leveled to the bare minimums, which is just fake grinding. But in Heavensward, I got to a point where I didn't want to wait 55 minutes for a dungeon anymore for an expert.
Yep.
So I leveled the tank, which is warrior, because it was either warrior, dark knight, or paladin. Paladin was basically really trash. And what I mean by that is not only was it bad at endgame content, but it was very boring to level up. You had like 2 buttons for like the first 50 levels and no AoE. You had an AoE enmity generator flash, but that was it. So it was really bad. So I leveled the warrior. At the end of Heaven's Ward, one of my friends messaged me, was like, do you know a warrior? Like, do you know any, basically they wanted a warrior. Like, do you know any tanks that are looking for a group? And I'm like, no, I don't know any right now. And they're like, do you tank? And I'm like, I can tank expert dungeons. Like, all right, try out for our group. And I'm like, because like we're gonna world race next year. And I'm like, so I tried it, and we went into the Alexander raid series, and I immediately banged out like 99th percentiles on every fight. And I was like, oh my God. And I felt tanky, and I was mitigating properly. And dude, they made me main tank everything. And I mean, even forced tank swaps, we like found a way for me to survive the damage. And I just fell in love. That was it, period. Like that.
Yep.
It's like, you know, I found the warrior in me. It was my dog's best friend. My puppy's over there, so I'll just show this. I got this little job. It's beautiful. I love warrior. Over time, I started learning the other tanks because I'm like, okay, I want to be able to play them all, because warrior might not be good forever. But for Stormblood, it was perfect. In Heaven's Ward, it was overpowered. It did more damage than DPS. So it's not fair, not cool. And then FanFest happened, where they announced Shadowbringers. And I was at that FanFest. Earlier, I told you that the first real Final Fantasy that I remembered playing through was Final Fantasy VIII. So when they announced Gunbreaker, they didn't even have to. I saw Thancred, and I'm like, this is it. This is Gunbreaker. And I'm like, I am going to play Gunbreaker. It is my job. I will be the Gunbreaker, even if it is the worst tank in the entire game. And then it wasn't, and then I was. That first raid, Eden's Gate, I made a lot of resources. That's when I became a mentor on the balance for Gunbreaker. And I was like the guy that people came to for rotations and everything, because I started thinking outside the box and kind of optimizing and changing skill speeds and stuff. I did a lot of the groundwork for that job. Nowadays, it's not so tough. I think it's very easy to understand. There's a lot of really good tanks out there, a lot of really, really, really talented players, and a lot of knowledge. But back then there was not, and people thought that Gunbreaker was really weak, and I'm like, I'll prove you wrong. It's very tanky. It does a lot of damage. And I competed in the Race to World First with it. That tier, we came in 16th, but we were like world 3rd for Voidwalker, which was pretty cool. We lost all our time.
Nice.
And thank you. And then, you know, we started doing, I came in T. I was actually the first Gunbreaker in the entire world to beat T. That was really, really cool. That was really nice. And we were like 5th place for that one. But it was overall, I had a very pleasant experience in playing Gunbreaker. And then over the course of Shadowbringers, I'm like, I want to learn a little bit of everything. I learned healing. I learned some DPS. And I'm like, okay, now I feel like I can actually play a little bit of everything. Because when I'm teaching people, and this is around the time now I'm starting to become like a Twitch partner. I'm streaming more Final Fantasies, like my main source of like what I'm doing with my day, and people want to learn. And like, do you know Bard? And I'm like, it shoots arrows. So like, do you know Astrologian? I'm like, throws cards. I'm like, I want to know these things. So I started learning, right? So I started learning them. And I kind of started feeling it out at the end of Stormblood, but I wasn't really ready yet. And then in Shadowbringers, I was really ready to start learning a little bit of everything. And then in Eden's Promise, I actually raced to World First on White Mage, which was crazy because we just couldn't find a tank. And so I'm like, okay, I'll heal. That was really cool. And then just ever since then, I've played tank in every race. I was on Warrior in the World's First Baldesian Arsenal and Warrior in the World's First Bozcha. And then fast forward to the next big content we had was for the Chaotic that we just had, the Cloud of Darkness. I actually did Sage on that because I wanted to heal. Nice. I'm like, I feel like healing 24 players, you're going to want to have somebody who's like watching for reses and stuff. I'm like, I will do that. I'll be the guy.
And that's where we're going to pause this part of the side quest, but don't worry, we've only just started scratching the surface. And the next part picks right up where we left off, so grab a drink, take a breather, and we'll see you in part 2 next week. In the meantime, don't forget to follow the show so you don't miss that next episode drop, and if you really want to come and chat about what you've heard so far, come and hang out in our Discord, The Tavern. We love to hear your thoughts, links are going to be in the description below, and we'll see you next week.